Hi, these are the most interesting historical photos that I could find. Let's go! A 1929 crash in Buffalo left a log driven through a car in a way that looked unreal. The shocking part is that the driver survived. On March 27, 1977, two Boeing 747 jets collided on a runway in Tenerife in the deadliest disaster in aviation history. The crash killed 583 people and 61 survived. On November 2, 1926, a crowd of London children ran after Father Christmas through the street. The photo captures a real holiday chase with dozens of children filling the road. In 1964, Muhammad Ali posed in a ring over the Beatles during a playful photo stunt. The image mixed the biggest boxer of the era with the world's most famous band. In 1959, children in the Arizona desert decorated a giant cactus for Christmas because there was no pine tree nearby. The photo shows how people turned a desert plant into a holiday tree. In 1970, one sign in Mexico said it all. Today, we are not working because we are going to watch Pelé. It shows how one football star could stop a normal workday. In 1958, the future Beatles played at a wedding before they became global stars. This photo shows them still working small gigs before Beatlemania changed music forever. In 1928, Londoners carried flood-hit animals to a free mobile veterinary hospital. The line shows how people tried to save pets and other animals during the disaster. On December 12, 1944, a huge line formed in Oulu, Finland, when liquor shops reopened after more than 3 months. The closure had been linked to wartime controls during the Second World War. In 1975, people climbed onto a helicopter during the evacuation from Saigon, Vietnam. The photo was taken during the final days of the Vietnam War. Patented in 1874, the Wooten desk opened into nearly 100 compartments, drawers, and slots. It was built to organize large amounts of letters, papers, and office records. In 1986, a punk sat next to a Volkspolizei officer on the East Berlin U-Bahn. The photo shows two opposite sides of life in the German Democratic Republic in one subway car. In 1978, Sigourney Weaver tested the flamethrower prop used in Alien. The photo was taken during production of the film that launched one of science fiction's most famous franchises. On April 30, 1975, evacuees climbed a ladder to the last American helicopter leaving South Vietnam in Saigon. About 5 hours later, South Vietnam fell to Northern forces, ending the war. This Soviet poster from 1944 shows German soldiers being driven into the Russian winter by Hitler's orders. It was wartime propaganda made to show Germany's losses on the Eastern Front. In 1971, an Aeroflot helicopter landed at the Sredna-Kolimsky State Farm in Yakutia, deep in the Soviet Arctic. The photo shows how helicopters connected remote reindeer herding communities across snowy regions with almost no roads. In 1959, workers packed cigarettes at the Java Tobacco Factory in Moscow. The factory was one of the best-known cigarette producers in the Soviet Union. In 1976, Rhodesian infantry soldiers posed in front of a military truck during the Rhodesian Bush War. The war lasted from 1964 to 1979 and was fought in what is now Zimbabwe. In 1956, a black woman in Montgomery, Alabama, looked toward Ku Klux Klan members walking down the street. The photo was taken during the year the Montgomery bus boycott made the city a center of the civil rights struggle. In 1916, a British soldier at the Battle of the Somme carried a rifle, bayonet, shovel, ammunition, boots, gas mask, and field gear. The Somme became one of the largest battles of the First World War and lasted from July to November 1916. An unidentified Japanese soldier sat in a basket carried by two Chinese men in a photo with no confirmed year or location. The image reflects the extreme power gap and forced hierarchy common in areas occupied by Imperial Japan. On March 27, 1964, the Great Alaska Earthquake tore apart roads, buildings, and entire neighborhoods. With a magnitude of 9.2, it remains the strongest earthquake ever recorded in North America. In 1967, Chinese Red Guards razed Mao Zedong's Little Red Book during a mass rally in Tiananmen Square. The rallies were part of the Cultural Revolution when millions of copies of the book were used as a political symbol. In 1938, the Giza pyramids still stood beside open fields and irrigation canals instead of dense city blocks. The photo captures how rural the area around one of the world's most famous ancient sites still looked before modern expansion. In 1992, the Unification Church held a mass wedding for 30,000 couples in South Korea. The ceremony took place on August 25th and became one of the largest wedding events ever staged. The Stalin Tunnel in Kyiv was part of a secret Soviet plan to run trains under the Dnieper if bridges were destroyed in war. Construction began before the Second World War, stopped during the war, and the project was never completed. More than 100 years later, this Ottoman supply train still lay in the desert where forces led by Lawrence of Arabia struck the Hejaz Railway. The railway was a key Ottoman route in the Arab Revolt during the First World War. On June 8, 1980, Mount St. Helens left entire valleys in Skamania County covered with blown-down timber after the May 18th eruption. The blast flattened millions of trees far from the crater, turning forested slopes into fields of broken trunks. Around 1900, Vulcana, born Miriam Kate Williams, became one of the most famous strongwomen in Britain. She was a Welsh weightlifter and stage performer known for displaying exceptional strength in an era when that was almost unheard of for women. In 1959, the Curtiss Wright Model 2500 aircar was built as a ground effect vehicle that rode on a cushion of air. Powered by two 180-horsepower Lycoming engines, it proved too noisy, too costly, and could not handle inclines. In the early 20th century, sail windmills at the Taku government salt fields near Tientsin were used to pump brine for salt production. These wind-powered machines helped move saltwater across the fields before electric pumping became common. In 1986, Freddie Mercury stood among Japanese fans during Queen's visit to Japan. By that year, he had already led Queen through Live Aid and some of the band's biggest global tours. On September 10, 1944, the Soviet Union received the 5,000th Bell P-39 Airacobra from the United States. The fighter was supplied under Lend-Lease and became one of the most used American aircraft in Soviet service during the war. In 1967, soldiers of the United States 173rd Airborne Brigade marched past the boots of men lost at Hill 875. The battle was part of the fighting near Dak To in Vietnam. During the Second World War, the Soviet Army tested pigeons fitted with small incendiary charges for attacks on enemy aircraft. The birds were released from aircraft in special cassettes, and the device was designed to trigger when a pigeon landed on a target. In 1960, Elizabeth Taylor reacted intensely while watching a boxing match from ringside. Her expressions in this photo became one of the most memorable celebrity crowd moments of the era. In 1946, a former German prisoner of war in Dresden read notices from people searching for missing relatives. After the war, families posted these messages in public places because millions of people were dead, displaced, or still missing. In 1908, crowds in Berlin watched the start of a balloon race as the first balloon lifted off. Air races like this turned early flight into a public spectacle years before passenger air travel became normal. In 1989, East German border guards sprayed water at West German civilians, tearing at the border wall. The scene came during the collapse of the Berlin Wall, when control at the border was breaking down. In 1947, King Michael of Romania drove his car down palace steps in a striking show of control. That same year, he was forced to abdicate, ending the Romanian monarchy. In January 1924, Vladimir Lenin was photographed in Gorky just days before his death. He died on January 21st, ending the life of the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution. In 1942, Britain used posters like this to raise money for Soviet war aid during the Second World War. The banner calls Churchill and Stalin comrades in arms and asks the public to support the Aid to Russia Fund. In 1953, this woman was photographed wearing the Miss Syria sash during a national beauty pageant era in the Middle East. The image preserves a rare glimpse of Syrian popular culture and fashion from the early 1950s. In 1958, Elvis Presley stood with other men during his Army draft physical in the United States. He was inducted that year at the height of his fame, turning military service into global front-page news. In the 1960s, this special camera car carried a huge telephoto lens for shooting inside a packed stadium. It let television crews film from field level with long-range close-ups that normal cameras could not get. On September 19, 1957, the United States carried out its first underground nuclear test in Nevada. The shot was part of Operation Plum Bob, a major test series conducted during the Cold War. After the police ambush of Bonnie and Clyde in 1934, Clyde Barrow's jacket was left torn by heavy gunfire. Reports from the scene said he was hit about 50 times, while Bonnie Parker was hit about 60. In 1944, this United States P-51 Mustang was forced down in Switzerland after entering Swiss airspace and attacking local aircraft. Neutral Switzerland defended its skies during the war and even shot down or interned foreign military planes that crossed the border. In 1963, Soviet missiles were shown in Havana during a parade after the Cuban Missile Crisis. The crisis began when the Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba near the United States. In the 1900s, bird sellers in Beijing carried live hunting birds on shoulder poles through the street. These birds were used as decoys or trained lures in traditional bird catching. In 1953, a North Korean officer sat with 2 American soldiers and looked through Western magazines during peace talks. The scene came from the final year of the Korean War, when both sides were negotiating an armistice. In the 1930s, a group of demolition workers posed on the ruins of St. George Church in Nizhny Novgorod. The photo comes from the Soviet anti-religious campaign, when many churches were closed or destroyed. In 1945, Soviet and American sailors celebrated Japan's surrender together. The moment marked the end of the Second World War. On July 1, 1968, Walter and Maritza Zapashny walked a tiger named Typhoon through Vladivostok. The Zapashny family became one of the best-known circus dynasties in the Soviet Union. In the 19th century, funeral agents carried miniature coffin samples in travel cases to show clients different designs. These sales kits let families choose size, style, and finish without visiting a workshop. In 1954, a Soviet RDS-2 atomic bomb was towed toward a Tu-4 bomber under guard. The RDS-2 was one of the early Soviet nuclear weapons built during the first years of the arms race. On April 4, 1932, Adolf Hitler spoke during the German presidential election campaign. That election was a major step in his rise to power, even though he lost to Paul von Hindenburg. In February 1941, prisoners stood in formation at Sachsenhausen concentration camp in Oranienburg. The barracks carried words like truthfulness and self-sacrifice, part of SS slogans used to mask the camp system with false moral language. In the early Soviet state, penal military labor units used the abbreviation ZK for convicted Red Army men. During the Belomor Canal project, the same letters were read as Canal Army Prisoner, and that is where the word Zek came from. On June 17, 1940, Soviet troops entered Riga and ended Latvia's independence. Within weeks, Latvia was absorbed into the Soviet Union. In December 1942, this bomb was marked with the words, "New Year gift for Hitler." The message was painted on the bomb itself as a direct wartime slogan before it was used. In September 1944, American troops landed from LCY craft on Morotai during the Pacific Campaign. Japan had occupied the island since early 1942. Warsaw, in 1945, looked almost wiped off the map, with whole districts turned into a gray maze of ruins after the war. Around 85% of the city was left in ruins, making it one of the most heavily damaged capitals in Europe. A teenage fighter of the Hungarian uprising walks through Budapest on November 4, 1956, looking far older than his age. Many rebels were students and workers facing Soviet forces in street battles that turned the city into ruins. In 1974, Elvis Presley trained seriously in karate and saw it as more than a hobby. His teacher, Kang Rhee, was one of the key masters who helped shape that part of his life and public image. Buried under Greenland ice, this P-38 Lightning looked like a frozen ghost from another world when it was found. The plane was part of the Lost Squadron, a group of American warplanes trapped on the ice in 1942 and recovered decades later. Boys in a Soviet village watch a German Mercedes-Benz 170 VK and Wehrmacht motorcycles push through deep mud on July 17, 1941. The photo captures how quickly the invasion reached ordinary village streets. Until 1966, many Soviet collective farmers were paid with workday credits instead of real monthly wages. This image shows how a person could receive grain for that labor, a system that kept millions tied to the harvest rather than cash. Wrestlers from Barnaul in the 1930s posed like early sports stars, showing how strength culture was already a big part of Soviet life. Local wrestling clubs were used not only for competition, but also to train discipline. A whole Sicilian family balancing on one small moped in the 1960s feels almost unreal today. But scenes like this were part of everyday life. Cheap scooters changed post-war Italy by giving working families a simple way to move through towns. Berlin, in 1945, still had burned-out armor sitting in the middle of its streets, as if the battle had ended only hours earlier. The fight for the city lasted until early May and left huge parts of the capital shattered before Germany surrendered. Australian soldiers marched home from the Vietnam War in 1970, but the return was far more complicated than a victory parade. More than 60,000 Australians served in the conflict. The nuclear icebreaker Rosia looks almost unreal in the Kara Sea ice, lit up like a floating machine from another world in January 1986. Built to break thick Arctic ice for northern shipping routes, Rosia was one of the Soviet Union's most powerful civilian ships. Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell pressed their handprints at Grauman's Chinese Theater in 1953, turning a film promotion into one of Hollywood's most famous photo moments. The ceremony helped sell Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. A man carries a Christmas tree past the Brandenburg Gate in 1944, capturing a quiet moment before the final collapse of the Third Reich. It was the last wartime Christmas for Nazi Germany, with Berlin already facing heavy air raids and fast-approaching defeat. George Curzon and his wife Mary ride through Delhi in 1902 on a richly decorated elephant, a perfect image of imperial power on display. Curzon was Viceroy of India at the height of British rule. Stacks of Allied food supplies in 1943 show how foreign aid became a quiet lifeline when the Soviet front was under crushing pressure. Lend-Lease deliveries brought bacon, lard, canned meat, and other basic goods that helped feed both soldiers and civilians. In 1905, camels helped pull water from Egyptian wells in a system that had changed little for centuries. Before engines reached rural areas, animal power like this was essential for lifting water for people, crops, and daily life. George Orwell's original 1984 manuscript shows the chilling slogans in his own handwriting, making the warning feel even more real. He finished the novel in 1948, and even the title came from flipping the last two digits of that year. The Temple of Olympian Zeus in 1858 already looked like a giant ruin from a lost world, with only a small part of its original glory still standing. Construction began in the 6th century before Christ. Soviet and American servicemen playing volleyball in Poltava in 1944 looks almost surreal, considering the alliance would soon collapse into distrust. The city was a key base for joint shuttle bombing operations. Princess Elizabeth walks past a naval guard in 1944, still years away from becoming queen, but already carrying the weight of history. During the war, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service and became the first female royal to serve full-time in the British Armed Forces. On the day Hachiko died in 1935, people gathered around his bronze statue at Shibuya Station, where he had waited for his owner for years. His loyalty became so powerful that Hachiko turned from one dog into a national symbol of devotion in Japan. Soviet soldiers dashed through the streets of Lviv in 1944 in a scene that feels frozen between chaos and survival. The battle for the city was part of the Lvov-Sandomierz offensive, one of the Red Army's biggest summer blows against German forces. A girl offers a flower to military police at an anti-war protest in 1967, turning a tense standoff into one of the era's most unforgettable images. Vietnam War protests were exploding across the United States that year. Muammar Gaddafi meets Bulgarian leader Todor Zhivkov in the Libyan desert in 1984, with rugs and cushions laid out right on the sand. The photo shows how Gaddafi turned even official meetings into theatrical desert scenes that made him instantly recognizable. This moon photo from 1865 looks shockingly sharp for its time, like the sky was suddenly pulled down to earth. Lewis Rutherford was one of the first people to capture detailed telescopic images of the moon. Marilyn Monroe takes a quiet break on the set of There Is No Business Like Show Business in 1954, looking effortless even between takes. The film was shot at the height of her fame, when every candid photo of her could become part of Hollywood legend. Soviet soldiers crowd the streets of Berlin in May 1945, in the tense days just after the city fell. The battle for Berlin ended the war in Europe and turned the ruined capital into the final symbol of Nazi Germany's collapse. This 1933 celebration captured the exact moment America dropped one of its most famous bans, and people wasted no time turning the party loose. Prohibition officially ended after the 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment. A family stands in Bearfield Pines, County Clare, on January 1, 1908, caught in a moment that now feels almost ghost-like from another age. Early family photos like this were still rare and formal. American soldiers attend Mass inside Cologne Cathedral in 1945, surrounded by rubble from a city shattered by war. The cathedral survived the bombing better than much of Cologne and became one of the few towering landmarks still standing in the ruined city. A newsboy sells papers announcing Germany's move into Poland in 1939, capturing the exact moment Europe tipped into a new war. The invasion began on September 1st and triggered the chain of events that launched World War II. Hitler's personal guard is being drilled in Berlin in 1938, a stark image of discipline and control before the war consumed Europe. The unit was based at Lichterfelde Barracks and armed with Mauser Kar 98K carbines. Doctors in Budyunovsk wrote their names on their medical coats in June 1995, fearing they might not make it through the hospital crisis. The photo preserves one of the most chilling details of that hostage siege, when even identification had to be prepared in advance. Algerian women in traditional dress at the turn of the century look like they stepped out of a world most people will never see again. Their layered fabrics, jewelry, and head coverings carried social meaning. A former Ravensbrück prisoner stands at the Nuremberg trials in 1946, turning her body into evidence the courtroom could not ignore. The camp held tens of thousands of women, and survivor testimony became some of the most powerful proof of Nazi crimes. Russian soldiers moved through ruined Grozny in 1995, with shattered apartment blocks towering over the street like broken shells. The Battle of Grozny became one of the most destructive urban battles in post-Soviet history. Children stand beside the fallen statue of Alexander III in Moscow in 1920, as the old empire literally lies at their feet. After the revolution, monuments to the Tsars were pulled down across Russia as the new Soviet state erased symbols of imperial power. Hitler Youth boys ride toward the edge of Frankfurt an der Oder in April 1945, in one of the war's bleakest final scenes. By then, Germany was sending teenagers into frontline anti-tank units as the Soviet advance closed in on Berlin. This photograph shows the branded hand of Jonathan Walker in 1844, after he was punished for helping 7 enslaved people escape. The letters meant slave stealer. A United States Army vehicle drives past Mount Vesuvius in 1944 as war and nature collide in one surreal frame. That eruption damaged Allied aircraft near Naples and became one of the most unexpected disasters faced during the Italian campaign. Liverpool drama students practiced stage slaps in 1939, turning acting class into a scene that looks surprisingly bold for its time. The lesson taught how to fake a convincing hit for the stage without causing real harm. A postal worker wearing a face mask in 1918 looks strikingly modern, as if this scene belongs to a much later century. During the Spanish flu pandemic, masks became a common safety measure in many cities, as mail and daily life still had to continue. A Soviet assault group moves toward the Reichstag in May 1945, carrying the flag through the ruins of Berlin at the final edge of the war. The storming of the Reichstag became one of the most powerful symbols of Nazi Germany's collapse. Japanese aviators aboard the carrier Akagi raise cups on December 6, 1941, just hours before one of the most world-changing mornings of the century. The next day, the strike on Pearl Harbor pulled the United States directly into World War II. Belka and Strelka pose with Soviet film stars in 1960, just after becoming the first dogs to return alive from orbit. Their flight turned them into global celebrities and proved that living beings could survive space travel and come back. Joe Aridy's prison photo is hard to forget because he was a young man who did not fully understand why he had been condemned. Decades later, he was officially pardoned, and his case became one of the starkest examples of a wrongful execution in American history. The reactor at Obninsk in 1964 looks surprisingly compact for a machine that opened the atomic power age. Obninsk became the world's first nuclear power plant to supply electricity to a public grid when it started operating in 1954. Blind children explore a hippopotamus by touch in a natural history museum in 1914, turning a huge animal into something they could understand with their hands. The photo captures an early hands-on teaching method. Evgeny Koltin looked like a giant from another era, with a build that made him one of the most striking faces of Soviet strength culture. He later became the first president of the Russian Federation of Athleticism. The USS Los Angeles rises through the fog in 1924 like a giant shadow, making early air travel look almost unreal. It was one of the largest rigid airships in the United States fleet and came to America as part of post-war German reparations. An anti-war protest in Italy in 1970 turns the United States flag into a blunt symbol of anger over Vietnam. By that time, the war had sparked mass demonstrations far beyond America, showing how deeply the conflict shook the world. Tamara Litsinskaya's portrait is chilling because it shows an ordinary student whose life was crushed by the Great Terror. She was executed in Moscow on August 25, 1937, on a false charge and cleared only in 1958. In 1952, the young Queen Elizabeth gave her first Christmas message, speaking to Britain at the very start of her reign. She had become queen that year after the death of King George VI. Queen Elizabeth II is seen in London in 1976 in a surprisingly domestic moment, surrounded by her beloved corgis. The dogs became one of the most recognizable parts of her image, and she owned more than 30 corgis over her lifetime. A Japanese doctor checks a young woman's pulse in the 1890s, showing how calm and precise medicine could look long before modern machines. In that era, pulse reading remained a key diagnostic method in Japan. A royal entourage from Montenegro waits in St. Petersburg in 1912, dressed in striking national costume. The photo captures old Europe just before it vanished. While we're looking at these photos, don't forget to write in the comments, which historical shot did you like the most, and for what reason? The Dalai Lama at age 9 in 1944 looks more like a quiet child than a world figure. Within a few years, he would be at the center of Tibet's fate. Messina in 1908 looks like a city crushed in a single moment. The earthquake and tsunami killed tens of thousands and nearly erased the city. Messina, after the 1908 earthquake, looks like a city torn open in minutes. More than 75,000 people died after the quake, and tsunami destroyed Messina and Reggio Calabria. London children walked through the rain before Christmas in 1915, carrying greenery through a city deep in wartime. Even during World War I, holiday traditions still filled the streets. A communist parade in Cluj-Napoca in November 1989 looked powerful on the surface, just weeks before the system collapsed. 1 month later, Romania's revolution swept away Nicolae Ceausescu and his regime. Berliners from both sides crowd the wall at Brandenburg Gate in 1989, celebrating the collapse of a divided city. Within weeks, one of the Cold War's strongest symbols was finished. A German supply column disappears into the frozen haze during Operation Barbarossa in the winter of 1941. The cold wrecked transport, fuel, and timing, helping turn the invasion into a disaster. Martini Macomo became Britain's first black lion tamer and one of the most famous circus stars of his era. Born in Angola, he drew huge crowds with performances that made him a legend of 19th century show history. Japanese sentries in gas masks stand guard in 1933, making the scene look eerily ahead of its time. The drill reflects how seriously Japan was preparing for modern air warfare before the next world conflict. Bela Kiss looked ordinary, but his name became one of the darkest mysteries of early 20th century Europe. In 1916, police found preserved bodies on his property, and he vanished before they could catch him. White Army soldiers in southern Russia in 1918 looked caught in the middle of a country tearing itself apart. The Russian Civil War split the former empire into brutal rival camps almost immediately after the revolution. American P-51 pilot Joe Peterbers survived the air war and later met former German pilot Walter Schuck, again decades after shooting down his jet. The two men became friends in 2005, turning a wartime duel into an unlikely human story. The Great Mosque of Gaza stands shattered in 1917, a stark image of how war can tear through even the oldest sacred places. The damage came during the British campaign in Gaza in the First World War. A soldier fires from a trench in a scene that shows how close and brutal early modern war could become. These dugouts turned open ground into a deadly maze where survival often depended on a few feet of cover. Children sit beneath the ruined circular church in Charleston in April 1865, with the city broken behind them. The damage came from Union bombardment and fires near the end of the Civil War. These simple grave markers in Russia mark some of the first American soldiers lost there in 1918. The photo captures a little-known chapter of the Civil War era, when United States troops were fighting far from home. Crowds gather outside the New York Stock Exchange on October 24, 1929, as panic hits Wall Street. The crash helped trigger the Great Depression and shattered faith in the booming 1920s. Mother Jones marches in 1904, already one of the fiercest voices of the American labor movement. Colorado authorities tried to push her out for backing striking miners. British troops pulled down fascist symbols in Kismayo in February 1941, turning a political empire into rubble. The scene marks how fast Italian control in East Africa was collapsing. Teen suspects stand silent in a New York courtroom in 1957, creating one of the most tense youth crime images of the era. The photo is striking because almost every face is lowered, making the room feel cold, heavy, and full of secrets. United States Marines take cover behind an M67 Zippo flamethrower tank during the Battle of Hue in 1968. The tank was built to fire burning fuel at close range, and this photo shows how troops used it as moving cover in street combat. Crew members of Japan's Shin-Toho Motion Picture Company build and film miniature warships for Battleship Yamato on June 8, 1953. Francis Firth photographed the Acropolis in the 1870s, showing the Parthenon before modern restoration changed the site. The image records missing sections, scattered stone blocks, and a much rougher ruin field than modern visitors see today. Soldiers of the Polish Independent Highland Brigade pose beside a German desertion sign in Norway in 1940. The sign tries to lure Polish troops away by claiming Britain is fighting without gain, while others profit from the war. The USS Missouri waits at anchor in Tokyo Bay in 1945, just before Japan's formal surrender ceremony was held on its deck. This ship became the exact site where the surrender documents were signed, ending the Second World War. A woman pushes a pram past the Conset Steelworks in 1974, capturing daily life beside one of Britain's biggest industrial sites. The photo is powerful because it puts a baby carriage and blast furnace smoke in the same frame. This cracked statue honors Vladimir Komarov, the first human to die during a space mission. It now stands abandoned outside Moscow, turning a Soviet space hero into a relic left in the weeds. Explorers photographed Stela K at Quirigua in Guatemala in the late 1800s, revealing one of the tallest and most detailed Maya stone monuments ever found. The carved ruler stands under a massive headdress. These images show Chinese cavalry units riding after China's first successful atomic test on October 16, 1964. China became the fifth country with this capability, and the horses were used in one of the era's most unusual military test demonstrations. This photo shows the Mahabodhi Temple before its late 19th century restoration. It preserves the damaged original form of the site, where Gautama Buddha is believed to have attained enlightenment. A Belgian resistance nurse gives first aid to a Canadian soldier during the fighting around Antwerp in 1944. The photo captures local resistance and Allied troops working side by side during the battle to retake one of Europe's most important ports. Oglethorpe University filled a sealed room with everyday objects, films, recordings, and machines in 1940 to preserve a snapshot of human civilization for the far future. It is planned to stay closed until the year 8113. This 1931 photo from Morocco shows Azo Basu, a man once sensationally called the last Neanderthal on Earth. The label was not scientific fact, but a myth built around his appearance and the era's obsession with living fossils. This photo shows a protest against the opening of McDonald's in St. Petersburg on September 10, 1996. The scene is striking because anti-American slogans and a Soviet flag stand directly under McDonald's signs. These are visa photos of the Sex Pistols from 1977, taken for their planned trip to the United States. The set is famous because it shows one band turning a plain immigration photo into a perfect record of punk style. The battleship Imperator Alexander III is seen at the Baltic shipyard in St. Petersburg in August 1901. It later sank in the Battle of Tsushima, where almost its entire crew was lost. Armored vehicles moved through Moscow during the August 1991 coup attempt by the State Emergency Committee. The image captures the moment Soviet military force entered the capital as the Soviet Union moved toward collapse. A United States Marine poses on Tarawa in November 1943 with a helmet punctured by enemy fire. The photo stands out because the hole is clearly visible, turning an ordinary portrait into direct evidence of how close the fighting was. A unit of the SS Volunteer Legion Netherlands moves through the snow near Leningrad during the war on the Eastern Front. The photo is remembered for its grim outcome. Within about 10 hours, every man seen here was gone. These are police photos of Fanny Kaplan, the socialist revolutionary linked to the shooting of Vladimir Lenin in Moscow on August 30th, 1918. The attack left Lenin badly wounded and became one of the key events used to justify the early Soviet Red Terror. Soviet fashion models stand in London in 1961 during a rare public display of Soviet style abroad. The photo shows Cold War image-making in real time, with state-backed fashion used as a cultural showcase outside the Soviet Union. A female guard from Muammar Gaddafi's personal security unit stands in Libya in 1983. The image is unusual because his guard became famous for including armed women, a rare choice for a leader in the Arab world. Peasants arrive at Kazansky Station in Moscow in 1929, heading to the city for seasonal work. The photo captures how rural workers flooded into Moscow carrying their own bags, tools, and food. Pashtun women students walk through Kabul in 1975. The photo records how visible female university life was in Afghanistan before decades of war and Taliban rule changed the country. A Kazakh nomad poses with 2 wolf cubs in the Kazakh Soviet Republic in the 1950s. The rifle, yurt, and live cubs in his hands turn the photo into a rare record of steppe life at close range. These are portraits of 3 cleaning women later executed at the Butovo firing range on February 17, 1938. In one day alone, the NKVD killed 502 people there, including Maria Vinogradova, Antonina Willer, and Sofia Tuchkova. Leo Tolstoy learned to ride a bicycle at age 67 and even received a Moscow cycling permit. In 1896, Scientific American noted that peasants at his estate watched in surprise as the famous writer rode around on a bicycle. Sigmund Freud walks with his 17-year-old daughter Anna in the Dolomites in the summer of 1913. Late in life, Freud called Anna his Antigone, showing how central she became in his final years. Demonstrators in Petrograd in April 1917 carry a banner demanding that Lenin be sent back to Wilhelm. The slogan accuses Lenin of serving Germany and shows how fiercely divided Russia already was months before the Bolsheviks took power. Soviet and American troops danced together at Torgau in April 1945 after linking up on the Elbe River. The banner welcomes the First American Army, and the portraits of Roosevelt and Stalin frame one of the war's most symbolic meetings. This is Vasil Bandera, the brother of Stepan Bandera, photographed as a prisoner in Auschwitz. He was killed there in 1942. These are NKVD prison photos of Lev Landau, one of the Soviet Union's greatest theoretical physicists, taken after his arrest in Moscow on April 28, 1938. He was accused of spying, but after a year in prison, he was released. This is Georgy Langemak, a rocket pioneer and one of the key creators of the Katyusha rocket artillery system. He was arrested during the Great Purge and executed in 1938, then posthumously rehabilitated after Stalin's death. Recovering soldiers at Walter Reed Hospital knit in 1918 as part of treatment for hand movement and nerve recovery. The photo shows how a simple craft was used as physical therapy for wounded troops. An American soldier poses with a Confederate flag during the Battle of Okinawa in 1945. The photo is unusual because it places a symbol from the American Civil War in one of the Pacific War's final major battles. Young workers stand beside a Soviet wall notice in 1947, praising a factory worker for reaching 539% of the production norm. The photo shows how the Soviet state turned extreme output figures into public propaganda. Nazi officers and cadets celebrate Christmas in 1941 at a long holiday feast. The photo is chilling because it shows a warm festive scene inside the same regime that was running mass murder across Europe. This photo shows a 3-year-old chimney sweep in 1933, a stark record of child labor still surviving in the modern age. The soot on his face and the brush on his back show that even very small children were still being used for dangerous, dirty work. Vietnam veterans march against the war in 1970 with a banner reading, "We won't fight another rich man's war." The photo is powerful because the protest comes from former soldiers, not civilians. Australian nurses on Bangka Island in 1942, shortly before one of the most infamous wartime crimes in the Pacific. After the sinking of the Viner Brook, 22 nurses were captured there, and only Vivian Bullwinkle survived long enough to later give testimony. This is Leonarda Cianciulli of Italy, later known as the soap maker of Correggio. Between 1939 and 1940, she killed 3 women and used their remains to make soap. This photo is tied to the Polish operation of the Great Purge, one of the largest ethnic killing campaigns of Stalin's terror. Between August 1937 and November 1938, the NKVD killed more than 111,000 Poles. People sled down Art Hill in St. Louis after the 1904 World's Fair had ended. The photo is rare because it shows a grand fair site turning almost immediately into a local winter playground. In 1934, wrestler Wally Kilminster took a foam bath in the dressing rooms at Wembley Stadium with his dog beside him. Photos like this were rare at the time because athletes were usually shown in formal poses or during competition. A military aircraft releases a chemical spray over forest in Vietnam, a scene linked to the use of Agent Orange during the war. Decades later, Agent Orange is still one of the most widely discussed toxic legacies of that conflict because its effects lasted far beyond the original missions. This vintage ad says, "Styles for all figures," and shows early bra designs with side closing, front or back closing, and fancy rayon brocade or glove silk. During World War I, demand for metal for war supplies helped push American women away from corsets. This photo shows women in an Irish Magdalen laundry, where many unmarried mothers and other women were forced to work under strict control. Some of these institutions stayed open until 1996. A British royal sits on the grass with several corgis while watching the Royal Windsor Horse Show in 1973. Corgis became one of the most famous symbols of the royal household because they appeared with her for decades. This photo shows a shan mantle or shame barrel, a public punishment device used in parts of Europe. People forced to wear it were mocked in the street, turning punishment into a public spectacle. In 1908, Harry Bensley accepted a bet worth £21,000 to walk around the world wearing a steel helmet. He had to travel on foot, push a pram, and keep his face hidden for the journey. A man in this 1900 photo carries a bear through the woods after a hunt. Images like this were once used to show strength and status, especially when large animals were involved. In 1905, Roy Dunn and Tiger the Goat were photographed during a record high jump attempt. The image captures one of the earliest famous animal sports records caught on camera. This 1910 Land Speed car was nicknamed the Beast of Turin and became famous for its huge aircraft-style engine. Its massive size and exposed mechanical design made it look more like a machine from a factory than an early car. This photo shows smoke rising from the USS California as the USS Oklahoma lies overturned in the water at Pearl Harbor. The attack on December 7, 1941, pushed the United States into World War II. In 1862, this photo showed Union officer George Armstrong Custer beside his former West Point classmate John Gimlet Lee after the Battle of Williamsburg. The two men had trained together before the Civil War placed them on opposite sides. In 1944, children in Warsaw were photographed helping build street barricades during the Warsaw Uprising against German occupation. The uprising lasted 63 days, and even civilians this young were pulled into the fight for the city. This 1863 photo shows the USS New Ironsides firing during the attack on Fort Sumter and Fort Moultrie near Charleston. It is widely described as the first known photograph of an active combat scene. In 1910, Harry Houdini posed in a straitjacket, one of the restraints that made his escape acts world famous. He later turned these escapes into huge public events by breaking free while hanging upside down above city streets. This dollar was saved from a first paycheck on May 28, 1943. Keeping the first dollar earned was once a common way to mark a first job or a major work milestone. Sergeant Rinaldo J. Martini of the 27th Marines is shown aiming his M1 rifle on Iwo Jima in 1945 while sitting on captured Japanese mortar crates. He had already earned the Silver Star on the first day of the battle. This photo shows part of a colossal statue of Ramses the Great being lifted back into place after it was cut apart and moved. The monument was relocated to save it from flooding caused by the construction of a major dam. German soldiers are shown fighting through the ruins of Stalingrad in 1943, one of the most destructive urban battles of World War II. By the end of the battle, the city was shattered, and Germany had suffered one of its biggest defeats. In 1918, 12,500 officers, nurses, and soldiers at Camp Gordon formed a giant human eagle. It remains one of the most striking military formation photos ever made with people alone. This 1969 press photo shows the books, code sheets, radio gear, and other items taken from a captured North Korean spy in Seoul. Even the ordinary objects stand out because they were part of a real Cold War espionage case. In 1912, Jim Thorpe competed at the Olympics after his shoes were stolen and he found two mismatched replacements. He still won gold in both the pentathlon and decathlon. On April 19, 1941, nurses cleared debris inside a damaged ward at St. Peter's Hospital in Stepney after a major German air raid on East London. 4 hospitals were hit in that attack, showing that even medical buildings were not spared during the Blitz. In 1939, about 22,000 people attended an American Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden in New York City. The photo is unsettling because it shows Nazi salutes being given openly in one of the most famous venues in the United States. I will be very grateful for your subscription to the channel. Every day I try to tell you about such interesting historical photos.